of AG officers at the top of the recruiting command when you took it over, one brigadier general and the chief of staff. I was wondering if...
Always commanded up to that time by line officers. I think, let me tell you what I think. I don't want to castigate anybody in front of me, okay? I think that's not useful on the one hand. I think the way to look at it is, when I came in, there was a commitment by the very top of the head shed of the Army to turn the thing around. And instead of adopting the previous stance of previous commanders, which was to open the size of the recruiting pool and take lesser endowed people, no high school graduates, high school dropouts, 17 years old, etc. We adopted a different stance, which was to squeeze the marketplace to go after high quality people, and to, I think probably the trick that made the difference was, instead of recruiting on a weekly recruiting objective, was to change to a contract recruiting objective, which meant that the recruiters did not have to bring people in next week. They could more leisurely work quality people, and we took care of the weekly placement function at the department, at the headquarters of the recruiting service. That was a major switch. I can recall Bobby Porter coming to me and saying, "You will break the recruiting force if you do that." He said, "Why don't you just tell us what you want, we'll go do it." And I said, "No, I'm not telling you. I'm changing the system, because I think the system we have now doesn't serve us well."
Was the contract for a quarter?
Contract was you had to bring in 3 per month.
3 per month, okay.
But you didn't have to bring them in the first week, the second week, the third week, or the fourth week. You just had to bring in 3 per month. So there was no weekly recruiting quota issued to a battalion commander, or to a recruiter, or to a company commander, or to a recruiting station. They didn't manage recruiting by week. We managed recruiting by week by placing people in the seating reservation system. But the recruiter didn't see that. All he saw was he had to bring in 3 contracts. He didn't give a damn when they went in the Army. So if he brought in a recruit Thurman who was in high school but wouldn't come into the Army until next summer, he still got credit for that. Before he got no credit for that. Before, he had credit for bringing a guy in this week because the guy was going to ship out next Monday.
Why did General Porter think this would break the system?
Well, because there was such a wrench around of everybody. In other words, the recruiting service had years of experience in bringing people in by week. So, I mean, he was honest in his evaluation, but that was a big risk for me. But I had confidence that that was one of the major problems we had. We were deep bottom fishing based upon this weekly mission game, and if we could get out of that and go into a more higher scale market, and therefore we could get it on a contract basis, we could get after a higher scale market. That meant I had to do negotiation work with the Training and Doctrine Command for people to recruit, when to arrive down there. But that made that my problem, not the recruiter's problem.
Yeah, you tolerated a lot of uncertainty because it's easy to manage if it's on a weekly basis, if everybody's working on a weekly basis. But you were juggling the availability of seats in the schools for people to go to. And
Well, I missed some seats,
Right.
okay?
Sure.
And you miss seats, and then people began to pile up in the summer. Then I had to go and explain to the Department of the Army and to the CG of the Training and Doctrine Command. I said, look at the quality I'm giving you. I'm giving you high school diploma graduates, even though you're going to have to train half again as, or 25% again as many people in the summertime, because that's when high school diploma graduates are available. So there's a big hoorah up at the Department of the Army and down in the Training and Doctrine Command. Says this guy Thurman is down there wagging the Department of the Army, wagging the Training and Doctrine Command. Who in the hell does he think he is? And I had to make a sales case. See, there were three sales cases going on. One sales case is to my recruiters. It says, you bring me 3 this month, and don't worry about them what week. I'll tell you what week they're going to go. Secondly, a sales case to the Army that says, I'm going to give you higher quality people. Not lower quality, higher quality. Which then translated into additional work for the Army in the summertime. And the third sales had to be to Congress. It says, if you will give me additional money for recruiting, for advertising, for the Army College Fund, we will jack up the quality of people coming in the Army. Now the payoff in all that is tremendous, okay, in more ways than one. Let me give you at least 3 payoffs. Okay, payoff number 1 is that you have a higher quality kid who has a better chance of assimilating the instruction on the weapon system or the devices that you want he or she to perform on as they go through the training base and into the Army. So there's a higher expectation of level of performance, giving the rule that generally smarter people are smarter than less smart people. Item number 2. If you bring on smarter people, we know through statistical analysis that smarter people will stay with you longer than less smart people. They have a higher propensity for serving out the total years of service. So, for example, a college or high school graduate has a rate of dropout more like 25% before he completes his 3-year term of service, while a non-high school graduate has a 40% dropout. So that meant that over time, the sum total to be put through the training base would go down. So if I can bring you smarter people, they won't get out as fast, and therefore I won't have to recruit as many downrange. The third reason that it's good to go after quality is high quality people don't get into trouble, and they don't create the disciplinary problems that you have with high school dropouts. It just, I mean, the data tells you that. So one of the things that I was good at, that I brought inherently to the job, was the appreciation of data. And I understood the long-term secondary consequences of things. You know, when if you look back at programmers, and I was an Army programmer for 5 years, and I was a TRADOC programmer for 2 years. So a period of time in my Army service, I spent 7 years as a programmer. 3 as a lieutenant colonel, 2 as a brigadier general, and 2 as a major general. So one of the things I learned that a lot of people don't learn is what is the long-term consequence of something. So I understood that if I could get the attrition rates down in the Army, that the size of the training base could be reduced. Now, having come from TRADOC, having 2 years on the job down there working with Bill DeVue and Paul Gorman, I understood that if we had smarter people going through this, we could understand better about the notions of self-paced instruction, assimilating more tasks in the training domain than before, etc. So when I became the chief of recruiting, I knew everything anybody wanted to know about TRADOC. So it was easy for me to go down to TRADOC and talk to them in terms they understood, because I had previously been the TRADOC resource manager. And I understood as much about the training base as anybody in TRADOC understood, having been there for 2 years. Then if I went to the programmers at the Department of the Army, I could say, I'm going to save you money in the long run. Saving money in recruits, think about this for a moment. If I bring in 170,000 recruits, which I did in 1980, I have to size the training base to handle that number of people. And that size of the training base and that size of the recruiting establishment means that's that less number of people that can be in tactical units. So one of the things I'm proud of in all of that is by the time I left as the desk perp, we had beat down the number of people to be brought into the service to 130-some thousand people. That's 40,000 people that we didn't have to bring into the Army, which meant I didn't have to give them a initial entry training clothing bag. I didn't have to put up the drill sergeants for that group of people. I didn't have to spend the money in the training base for that group of people. And that 40,000, you have to divide that by 12. Basically, if you look at it even, divided by 11 is better stated for sort of an even distribution over 11 months of training, gives you an average of almost 4,000 people a year. That's a brigade of troops that could be in the combat forces as opposed to being in the training base or being in the recruiting pile. So there was a payoff for going after quality in a way which benefited the Army far beyond the aggrandizement of saying, well, we got more high school diploma graduates. It's a cost-benefit equation that would accrue to the Army in a way that most people couldn't look at. Now, I looked at that way because I'd had all this time as a programmer.
Right, you were used to integrating dollars, cents, people,
Well, over
time,
a long period of time.
Yeah.
So I was able to be persuasive about that to the Congress. I was able to be persuasive about that to the internals of the Army. So, I mean, these three different constituencies that I had, I was running a sales campaign on all three levels.
Not to mention the guys out in the street that you were trying to bring in.
That you're trying to recruit, that you're trying to bring in. I mean, so you're running 4 different advertising programs simultaneously. One to the people you're trying to recruit, one to the Congress to give you the recruiting resources, one to the Army to turn about its thinking about that, and one to the recruiter himself that he can be successful in this market.
Now, the guys who were doing this selling, primarily it was Thurman, but were there others sort of saying, I mean, your cheering section or helping?
Oh, yeah. I mean, like Goff, he understood all this.
Goff, right, yeah, okay.
Max Noah took over as a programmer. He was right behind me as the chief programmer of the Army. And he had been at TRADOC. He understood it, so he was able to carry freight for me. Jack Vesey understood it. Guys in Congress, who got accolades in Congress. I mean, this sounds like self-aggrandizement, and it is, but Les Aspin said there were 3 people that were formative in turning about the Army in the 1980s. I mean, he told me this. I didn't know it until he told me. He gave a speech on the floor of the Congress. 3 people that turned it about. One was a guy named Abrams on changing about the reserve relationship. One was Bill Perry on bringing us stealth aircraft and precision weapons, and one was a guy named Thurman who recruited the all-volunteer service. So we made a major change function in the Army, and everybody benefited. Now, commanders, first of all said, my goodness, you know, the quality of people is substantially better. You go ask commanders about that. I mean, don't ask me about it. Go ask them. Because now I'm not a commander. You follow me? I'm a manager. I mean, I'm not in the field. I'm in the garrison. I'm in the head shed all this time. I'm not out there in the field where the rubber meets the road. commander said, my God, these guys know how to gun tanks. They know how to act as loaders. And the commanders then looked around and said, look, my God, I don't like to spend any time on disciplinary matters with these guys. And then they said, geez, I'm not short people. I got to fill up units. So commanders felt better. So when commanders feel better and their troops are better, then you can turn on the third leg of the stool, which is the quality stool, which is the training function, which says if I can have really good training, which is what troops sign up for. You know, you entice them to come into the service by showing them what kind of work you're going to do. Then they go to basic and AIT to find out the basics of that, and they come out of that on a high. Then if they go to a unit that doesn't have enough people in it, doesn't have a very high quality, then their morale plummets, as opposed to going into a unit that is very high in training tempo. So now we have, by 1981 and 1982, we've begun to change our training systems. Stuff Gorman was doing in the mid-70s is beginning to come to fruition. We suddenly have the units are filled up with people. The National Training Center is beginning to come along, and people are able to take their units and go to the field, feel good about themselves. So what naturally happens then is re-enlistment rates begin to go up.
Then you need to recruit still fewer.
So you have to recruit even less. So now by the mid-80s, in the late 80s, we're down into 115,000, 120,000, 127,000, 124,000. So I mean, you really stabilized the Army. I mean, the Army becomes a stable platform where people can come in and serve for a long period of time. So there's sort of a snowballing effect. Remember what I said last go-around is the first thing I said is if we don't fill up the infantry, armor, and the field artillery, we don't have an army. Because those are people who go out in combat and get killed. So you got to fill them up. So these people are beginning to feel good. Okay, then you begin to lard over that equality indice that begins to come along in 1981. And by 1982, people are saying, by God, we've got an army here. So if you look now, it is Scheimer's stewardship in the people domain, aided and abetted by Jack Vesey, who is the vice from 79 to 82. Then from 82 to 83, John Wickham comes in as the vice. And Scheimer's got the helm all that particular time, and we're making steady progress in peopling the Army. Quality's going up, drugs going down, crime is going down, training is up, tempo is going up. By the end of his stewardship, things are going pretty well with respect to the people side of the Army.
I've accepted your reluctance to be the subject of a biography, but last week you were talking about how important it was for you to watch General Depew market his vision to the Army, even though he was not the Chief of Staff.
Yeah.
And as I listen to you now, it sounds like you're telling me how you had a vision of what would happen if the junior enlisted personnel brought into the Army were of a high quality and how it would spread. And you understood the ramifications and the second and third order consequences. And you did it. And I'm just feeding that back to you as sort of so you'll understand why I focused on you as the guy whose perspective is crucial in telling the personnel story of the Army.
Yeah, and I accept that. I mean, I did have a crucial role to play about that. But the point I'm trying to make is that's quite different than being the subject of the paper. okay? So I'm just saying biographically, I'm not interested in a biography, you know. No, I think if I look in retrospect on how were you a successful chief of recruiting, okay? And others may not have been. I mean, they didn't have the access to the headshed that I had, and et cetera. What I brought to it, I go back and look at my days as a major in the Army. When Mike Davison gave me free range to run an exciting interface program with the American public and the cadets at the military academy, which is called a Cadet Activities Officer. And I learned a lot about how to meet the public, and how to work outside of conventional lines of authority. The second thing that I came across is now when I get to be a lieutenant colonel, working for Depew, I learned how to look at actions taken today and their secondary and tertiary consequences, and how resources made things dance. I mean, it was the manipulation of resources that made things happen. And also understood how you made sales about that into the Army hierarchy. In other words, people that don't get a chance to do that don't know how to do that. Okay? The third thing that I learned working for Depew at TRADOC and the like is I learned the nits and lice of how an outside commander, given that he's not on the Army staff, manipulates the Army staff and also manipulates the Congress. So then when I get back to the Army staff, then as a programmer, I get more deeply involved in analytical details about the various segments of the Army. So I began to know a lot about the personnel system of the Army, even though I wasn't responsible for putting it together. Now, if you take Gene Forrester or Bill Mundy or Bill Fulton and some of those guys knew some of those things that I just described. But in being fair, I don't think any of them approached it analytically as I did. And that's because I had been the Army's programmer for so many years, 5 years of my adult life, you know, sort of my formative contribution to the Army at the grade of lieutenant colonel and beyond. 5 years of my work was spent in that kind of field, looking at analytical approaches to things and what the application of resources would be about that. So putting together analytically based arguments to be persuasive to the Congress, or to be persuasive to TRADOC, or to be persuasive to the Department of the Army staff came easy for me. And the results of those assignments which I had, nobody could have ever predicted that I would have been sent to the recruiting command. You follow me? Right. But when I got to the recruiting command, I found out I was the cadet activities officer again. The least thing that Schaumeyer wanted to do was run the recruiting command, so he sent me out there. I mean, he wanted to get rid of it, give it to somebody that can go run it. So I was back on my own again, much as I had been as a cadet activities officer. Well, I'd learned to operate on my own without a great deal of adult supervision. Now, I had to operate within a regulatory base and within statutory base. In other words, I didn't break the law, and Depew had counseled me before that one of the things when people began to view you as a very competent person that's going to rise to higher rank, one of the things I want you to do, make sure you don't embarrass the Army, and that you will run things correctly. I mean, in accordance with not only the letter and spirit of the law, but not the letter of the law and regulation, but the spirit of the laws and regulations as well. So I think that I was a good assimilator, and one of the things that I pride myself on is the ability to synthesize information. I can take disparate information, bring them together, and then homogenize it into some workable alternatives. Now, this is my first major general command. I haven't commanded anything. Didn't command anything as a brigadier general, didn't command anything as a major general. So I've been a general officer for 4 years and I haven't commanded anything. So, I mean, there is some apprehension that the actions that you take prove to be useful and accomplish the mission. I mean, sure, there's apprehension about that.
Right.
And so it's not like the apprehension one would have if one was a division commander or whatever, because, I mean, it's a different kind. I mean, you get human life at risk about that if you have to be in combat. But here's a case where there is reputation of the unit at stake. There's the reputation of the Army at stake. There's the overall image of the Army at stake. There's the reputation of the Army before the Congress at stake. And certainly then there's a personal reputation at stake. So, and there's a reputation of the people that work for you. You want the people working for you to feel good about themselves.
So you were going to change everything, so your neck was out a mile. And
yeah, but it was easy.
yeah.
I mean, for me it was easy.
I think it may have been easier for you than for others.
Well, I think,
I'm sure you must have had some
I think the
anxiety.
fact that the chief of staff said to me, go out and straighten it out and turn it around, I knew what was to be done.
You sure did.
I mean, I knew what he wanted to be done. I knew the implied mission. And I operated within the scope of authority which I had, but if you look at it in military parlance that we use today, for combat forces, one of the things we say is you got to operate inside the headspace of your commander, and you're trying to be able to use your own initiative, knowing that you are in full accord with the desires and will of your commander, but you don't ask him for authority to do things unless you can't do it yourself and you have to have his authority. Now, some people call that the usurping of authority. You follow me? In other words, there's a fine line there
Yeah, between
exceeding what people think is your authority and what you think is your authority versus what is the authority of your bosses. And if I erred, it is certainly I erred in the notion of exceeding my authority in every case, and I practice that at the grade of Major General, Lieutenant General, and General. I always usurped and exceeded my authority. It's the nature of what happens when you hire me.
Right.
So I would say that turns out I was a perfect fit for the job.
Perfect.
And whether that happened serendipitously or whether it's pre-calculated, certainly the Army doesn't pre-calculate its assignments for general officers. Normally they are picked up and shoved around without proper view of their progression through ranks to various and sundry things, which is a whole other subject. But I turned out to be the right guy at the right place at the right time. Happily for me and happily for the Army. Happily for the recruiters. I think recruiters that were in the recruiting force in 1980, 81, and 82, they think a lot about themselves, feel good about themselves. I know the battalion commanders do, most of the brigade commanders. It's tough, but fun.
Yes. It worked. You won the sergeants over with the notion that the officers would put a man in boots.
Yeah.
But you also turned their world upside down
Yeah.
by changing who they go after and what the schedule that they're going after and their sort of working
Yeah.
tempo. All of that you changed. Did heartburn feed back to you about that sort of thing?
In every case, in every one of the battalions, you had people who could not reform. And so what I did is I told the battalion commanders, brigade commanders, you know, they had the authority to turn people back to the force. And I said, that is salutary, and you must look at that as not punishment to go back to the active army.
This just an administrative transfer? It didn't
No,
have...
he just said,
board
your term is up. I mean, you didn't have to put any bad paper in. He just said, let's see, now you were a tanker, Thurman? Yes, I was a tanker. Okay, we're gonna send you back to Fort Knox for a refresher, and then you're subject to worldwide assignment as a tanker.
This-
After you did that for a few times, you understand, a lot of people decided they'd really get with the recruiting program. See, a lot of people had come to the recruiting program for exactly the wrong reason.
Yeah, they'd come as a
Well,
lifetime...
they didn't want to go back to Europe every 18 months. And oh, by the way, it sink their roots in a hometown. They thought that was a good idea. I found out I had one recruiter that was coaching a high school football team
I'm not surprised.
in New Mexico. And I said to the battalion commander when I found that out, I said, I understand I got this guy coaching a high school football team. Yeah, he said, terrific coach, been coaching him for 5 years.
He probably was making mission, too.
And I said, he didn't coach a high school team. You go down and see the superintendent of schools, and the principal said, we're not doing that. And I got a letter from a congressman in his area. It says, this guy's a tremendous role model as a high school coach. What can we do? And I said, wait a minute, guys, we don't coach high school football teams. Now, see, this guy had sunk into the community
He'd left the Army.
to the
yeah.
point he left the Army. He probably wore a uniform, you know, maybe on once a week or something like that. You know, I mean, screwy business here. So, yeah, you had a lot of high school athletes come in, the kind of guys who want to get to, but I mean, but the problem was we had to reorient some of the recruiting force. And so you had to dig out guys like that, and when they'd come to light, you'd say, hey, wait a minute, we don't coach. I mean, look at your people, fellas. This is a full-time mission. Now look, the reason it's a full-time mission, notwithstanding this high school coach that made his mission, you understand, last year we missed the mission by 17,000, so don't give me this crap now that we have all these good things going when in fact you missed the mission by 17,000 last year. So get the cobwebs out of your head here, guys. We're going to work. This is a working operation here, and get your head straight about it. Now, in the summer of '80, I brought in some key figures into the recruiting game. One was a Brigadier General named Olson, who had come straight from the Big Red One. He was also an analytical guy. He had been an operations research guy, and I'd known him very well. Brought in a guy named Bob Phillips, who was a PhD sociologist and business administration guy, an armor guy, and he ran my recruiting operations. Brought in a guy that looked after the ethical side, brought in another terrific judge advocate general for my judge's shop. So we had a strong, and then we were getting this influx of battalion commanders to be on normal rotations out. We were really getting some first-class people in 1980. And now the recruiters are coming back from the active army in Germany and all that kind of stuff. So the rollover of people coming into the service was really getting first class.
Is recruiting operations guy, is it sort of like the G3?
Yeah.
And what did it amount to? Was he the chief trainer of...
Well, he ran the training function. He ran the everyday manipulation of the recruiting network of automatic data processing network. Phillips designed, I'll give you an illustration, in order to improve the tools that we had for the fellow who recruiter out on the streets, we designed a one-page worksheet like an insurance guy would work for you, which would say how much money is this 2 years worth to you. Turned out that if you use wage scale only, the 2 years would be worth maybe, let's see, 500, let's say nominal $500 a month. At $6,000 a year, you'd be at $12,000 for 2 years, but if you added on the $9,600 you got for being the infantry, armor, field artillery, now you're up to $21,000. And you got your PX and commissary offset, or you got your airborne allowance, or whatever. Suddenly you make it $32,000 for this first 2 years of service. You present that to a high school parents, kids' parents, and you say, this is what your son has the opportunity to work for and earn the next 2 years, $16,000 a year. I mean, $1,980, that's not small change.
Right out of high school, right?
Right out of high school, right. So, I mean, Bob was a very inventive guy who could, he didn't know anything about recruiting, but it didn't take him 5 seconds. He's a quick study guy, he was an analyst guy. I had this guy Benchoff now that was getting his PA&E shop all up to speed, and I had 15 guys in my PA&E shop, all of whom had graduate degrees in operations research. We could out-analyze anybody, out-analyze the Congress, out-analyze the Department of the Army, out-analyze OSD, you name it, out-analyze anybody. And so we had a terrific stable of guys in there the summer of 1980. And then they all stayed a year after I left, so they were there through 81 and then were there most of 82. So there was continuity built in and all that, and they worked fine. So that's recruiting.
That's recruiting.
Fun deal.
And then you got sent to, how did it happen? What was the progression to Des Per? It seems like a natural one, but how did it actually happen? Did Shai appoint you? Or?
Yeah, this is the summer of 81. And I think between, now Yerkes had a formative hand. He was the Des Per at the time, and he had a formative hand in recommending people to be various and sundry jobs. I would have preferred to have gone back to the force, you know, as a division commander, but by now, since this is 81, I'm 50 years old. In 81. So I'm still in the contention to go back in command of division. I'm not too old to go command division, so it would have been a nice job to go command division. Why Shai and the Des Per and the vice decided I should be the Des Per, I can't tell you. You know, they didn't confer with me about that. They said, you're going to be promoted to Des Per here. So, age 50, I'm promoted to Lieutenant General and put in as a Des Per. And there was much to do there. There was as much to do there as there was in the recruiting command, although I didn't really understand it at the moment about that.
And here's where you had to confront the shortage of NCOs and the fact that they were meeting each other, coming and going on overseas
Yeah, I think
assignments.
there are several things that sort of come to bear there early on. One of those is to shepherd the recruiting program. The guy that took it over from me was a guy named Howard Kroll, who had been Shai's DISCOM commander, I believe, in the 3rd Infantry Division in Germany. And he was the training officer at TRADOC. So Shai asked me, what do you think about making Howard the recruiting command commander? I said, I think it'd be terrific. He knows TRADOC, and there's a tremendous linkage between TRADOC and the recruiting service. So I think he'd be fine doing that. So he made him the recruiting service. So the first order of business was to make sure that I supported the recruiting commander in the manner in which I had been supported. Because this thing had just gotten underway and the baseline had been laid, but the reaping of the harvest came in 81 and 82 and 83. The second major endeavor was to try to understand the systems that were invoked in the management of both Army officers and Army non-commissioned officers, particularly, which affected the density of NCOs by military occupational specialty. And the third item that came on the scene was Shai's interest in organizing the Army family business. The fourth item that came on the scene was the cohort item, business. The fifth item that came on the scene was the relationship of why high-quality people were necessary for use in high-quality weapons systems. And what a term which I would use is called man-print. How to get the personnel people into the procurement and fielding of weapons systems. The sixth thing that came on there was to make sure that each one of the career fields from top to bottom, from E9 down to E1, was appropriately filled with the requisite talent. Next thing that came on the scene was to find out what was perturbating the number of NCOs in each career field. Why weren't the career fields balanced? And the next item that came on the scene was a reinvigoration of the leadership business, officer and NCO leadership business. So those were some of the major domains that I applied work to as a staff officer. So which one of those you want to talk about?
All of them. You can't.
Well, let's take some sort of in some kind of order here a little bit. Let's take one. This is shepherding and recruiting. Says do all you've been doing and encourage the guy. Listen to him on a monthly basis. Give him the resource. Get the resource. Give him to him, and support him in every way possible. Let's set that one aside. We were beginning to get the rumbles at OSD that, as is in all cases. Oh, the last item on the list was get the GI Bill approved. We were beginning to get the rumble at OSD, gee whiz, got to cut back on the amount of recruiting money. In other words, you're doing so well that we ought to be able to cut back on the level of money that's financing recruiters, advertising, recruiter budgets, and all that kind of stuff. And so you had to build an argument that having quality people, see, I already knew what the answer was. You know, you can reduce the size of the recruiting force and reduce the size of the training base and all that. That's the internal argument to the Department of the Army. But to the Department of Defense, you had to take on a different stance, which was, if you looked at, if you used to draw a little chart, it's a very simple chart. You bought a weapons system over its current weapons system. You bought the M1 tank over the M60 tank because it had an inherent performance capability which was greater than the current tank. Now, if you then went out and measured the performance capability of the new tank over the performance capability of the old tank, you might not get the performance curve that you thought you were going to get. And the reason you might not get it is because that part of the performance curve was a dependent variable on the quality of the people. And when you do research for weapon systems, you always give people a uniform 1.0, 100%, they're 100% good. But people aren't 100% good. Some people are better than others. So we went on a kick then of trying to show and demonstrate how quality people could make the new weapon systems perform up to the standards that they were bought for. Now, this turned out to be a long and never-ending saga, because it goes on for at least 10 years that I'm aware of. But now in 1981, we took as a weapon system, for example, the Stinger versus its predecessor, the Red Eye air defense weapon. And we figured out then that a smart guy could operate the system